Alright, so the first thing we need to do is open up our computer, and we need to start looking at components that we're going to be unplugging and removing, like the motherboard power, DVD drive, all these SATA cables, the red, blue, and black, the fan cables with the white connectors, the power supply. I'm going to have to take out the video card, the cooler with the radiator and fan. At the top, there's some tabs to get the top cover off and expose where the new radiator is going to go. At the back, we're going to be unscrewing this radiator and fan. I removed the water cooling and I removed the GPU. Unplug all the USBs and fans. Pull out the motherboard power. Use the tabs to remove the RAM sticks, and then unplug all the SATA cables. Check all the labels on these tiny cables for your case. You're going to need them when you reconnect it to the new motherboard. Locate all these ATX motherboard mounting screws and unscrew all of them so you can take your motherboard off of the base that it rests on. Here's what it looks like with the screw in the hole. Once the motherboard is unscrewed, make sure you take off the I/O shield. You might have to pry it off, or else your motherboard won't release from the case. Now the case is finally empty and ready for a new motherboard to be installed. Here's the one I'm going to be installing. It's the ASUS H570-PRO Wi-Fi. Then I'll be installing the Core i7-10700 inside that motherboard, along with XPG GAMMIX 16 gigabytes. Here is inside the motherboard box. You have the board itself, along with this Wi-Fi antenna. There's where your new CPU is going to go, right in that slot where it shows the TUF Gaming logo. The RAM slots are down there. There's where your large motherboard power cable is going to go. Here's our USB headers. SATA connections down there. The RGB header is for your lighting, for your fans, and the USB header is just for more USB ports. Here's where you can connect your extra case fans. You see the ATX mounting holes. Here's our processor. Comes with some manuals, as well as the chip itself. When you're ready to do the CPU installation, which is probably going to be the first thing, you really want to make sure that you know how this works. This little mechanism here, it opens and closes, it slides under that screw and locks in place. If you force this, or if you don't line it up correctly, you're probably going to damage your CPU, and that's a really bad way to start building a computer. So just mess around with the mechanism a little bit, make sure you know how it works. You gotta really pay attention to all these grooves because it has to exactly line up to the grooves on your chip. There's only one way that this chip can go inside there, so if you screw it up, you're probably gonna mess up the pins or the chip itself. So the chip is installed, it's right side up. Slide this so it's gonna go right under that screw. We pull down the latch. You can do this slowly. You'll feel a little bit of pressure. You slide this to the right a little bit and then under that notch, and that's gonna secure it in place. Now you're done with your CPU installation, and if you did this correctly, that really didn't take much effort, it lined up perfectly, and it's nice and tight. Check your motherboard manual for M.2 slot info, meaning pick a M.2 slot that doesn't share bandwidth with the SATA slots. Depending on how much RAM you have, line up the sticks according to the manual and plug it into the correct slots. Here's the XPG GAMMIX RAM. It has a notch in the middle, so you know how it needs to be oriented. We're using 2 sticks, and we're using the first and the third slots from the right hand side. Now we're going to line up the radiator screw holes with the case so that it's ready for mounting. Now the radiator is mounted to the case, the tubes are hanging, and the pump is waiting to be installed onto the motherboard. This part's really annoying. You have to line up the mounting brackets to the correct screw holes in the right orientation onto the pump so that it can mount correctly to the motherboard. And take off the sticky plastic before putting this onto your CPU. After you have your brackets mounted onto the cooler itself, you have to use these plastic mounting brackets for behind the motherboard, and they're going to keep moving, so maybe use some tape or something else to hold them in place, because every single time you put it up, it's just going to fall right off. These things are trash. Here's my taped up plastic bracket behind the motherboard. Line up your motherboard ATX screw holes and put in your ATX screws to secure the motherboard to the case. Put a pea-sized drop of thermal paste onto the center of the CPU. Mount the cooler onto the CPU and tighten the screws down. Plug in your CPU power up here. Connect the giant motherboard cable power up here. Connect your SATA cables back. If you have a modular power supply, just organize your power cables. For cable management, route your cables through the back of the case so you don't see them. Connect the cooler fan to an RGB header. Connect the pump to this header over here. Plug in the rest of your SATA devices. Check the manual to locate all the case panel header pins for your lighting, your case power button, all that stuff, and line them up and plug them in. Take a minute to check your connections. Locate and plug in the HD audio header. You can plug back in your keyboard, mouse, your internet, and your video cable, and now you can switch on the power supply. If everything's connected correctly with the RGB stuff, you should already see your lights lighting up. Now you can power up your computer and look for the BIOS screen. If everything works, you're going to see the BIOS screen on your monitor. The BIOS will show you your fan RPMs and all the settings for your motherboard. If you want to maximize your system performance, install a 2280 SSD under the large SSD plastic cover. You can use an ARGB cable to connect 3 fans to just one ARGB slot. This is pretty useful to simplify your cable connections and make your cable routing a lot easier. Here's where I plugged in my ARGB header cable. On the fan connector side, make sure you line up the arrows to get it correct. If you have a graphics card, you can plug it right back into the PCIe slot. If you have regular case fans, you can plug them into any fan header.